Shaq was just grabbing a coffee when he saw it. A soldier, still in his army uniform, being slammed against a truck by a cop. The officer sneered, "You match the description of a car thief." Shaq's jaw tightened. The whole gas station went silent. People pulled out their phones. Cameras rolled. But instead of arguing, Shaq stepped forward. Because he knew exactly how to handle this. And what he did next, no one saw coming. Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments and don't forget to subscribe. Marcus Carter took a deep breath as he stepped out of his truck. The air smelled like home, fresh cut grass, a hint of barbecue from a nearby restaurant, and the comforting scent of the old gas station he'd stopped at since he was a kid. After 4 years serving in the army, he was finally back. His mother's tearful hug still lingered on his skin, and his younger brother Malik had been attached to his side since he landed. But as Marcus grabbed the gas pump, the peaceful moment shattered. Sirens. Red and blue lights reflected off his truck's windows, casting a chaotic glow across the station. A police cruiser skidded to a stop, tires screeching. Marcus barely had time to turn before. "You! Hands where I can see 'em!" The voice was sharp, aggressive. Marcus instinctively lifted his hands, his heartbeat spiking. He had just come back from a war zone, yet somehow, standing here in his own hometown, he felt more threatened than he ever had overseas. A tall, broad-shouldered officer stormed toward him, one hand on his holster. Rick Dawson. A name Marcus had heard before. His reputation? Bad. The type of cop who harassed people just because he could. Marcus kept his voice calm. "Sir, is there a problem?" Dawson smirked, looking him up and down like he was inspecting a suspect rather than a man in army fatigues. "Yeah, you match the description of a car thief." The gas station went silent. A couple of customers turned to watch. A woman pulled out her phone. Marcus furrowed his brows. "A car thief?" He motioned toward his truck, keys still in hand. "This is my vehicle. I just got home from deployment." Dawson ignored him, stepping closer. His fingers flexed near his holster. "I don't care where you came from, boy. You match the description. That's all that matters." Marcus clenched his jaw. That word, boy, like he was some criminal, not a man who had risked his life for his country. A voice called out from the side. Malik, his little brother, standing near the gas station doors, eyes wide with fear. "Marcus, what's happening?" Marcus didn't look away from Dawson. "It's fine, Malik. Stay inside." Dawson chuckled. "Oh, it's fine, huh? You just standing here all innocent, and I'm supposed to believe you didn't just jack this truck?" Marcus took a slow breath. He knew how this went. If he argued, if he moved wrong, it could escalate fast. "Check my registration, my ID. I've got everything in the truck." Dawson's smirk grew. "Oh, we'll check, right after I pat you down." Marcus tensed as Dawson reached for him. Then Malik rushed forward. "Hey, he didn't do anything." Dawson's head snapped toward the boy. His expression darkened. "Back off, kid, or you're next." Marcus's stomach dropped. His hands curled into fists. His little brother wasn't safe, and for the first time since he got home, Marcus realized neither was he. Marcus kept his hands raised, his muscles tense, but his expression steady. His army fatigues, still creased from travel, should have been enough proof of who he was. But Dawson wasn't interested in the truth. He was interested in control. "Sir," Marcus said slowly, keeping his voice even, "I just got back from duty. That's my truck. My name is Marcus Carter." U.S. Army. Dawson scoffed. "Oh, really? And where's your proof?" Marcus motioned toward the passenger seat. His army duffel bag sat there, his military ID clipped to the front pocket. "Right there, you can check." Dawson didn't even glance at it. Instead, his smirk widened as he took a step closer. "You think I'm just going to take your word for it?" he sneered. "You could have stolen that uniform just like you stole this truck." Marcus clenched his jaw. His hands curled into fists for a split second before he forced them to relax. He'd faced enemies on the battlefield. He'd trained to keep his cool under pressure, but nothing could prepare him for the humiliation of being treated like a criminal in his own hometown. He tried one more time. "Sir, if you just check..." Wham! Dawson lunged forward and slammed Marcus against the truck with enough force to rattle the metal. Gasps erupted from the small crowd forming near the gas station. A woman pulled out her phone. Someone muttered, "What the hell is he doing?" Marcus gritted his teeth as Dawson yanked his arm behind his back, twisting it painfully. "Hey, what are you doing?" Malik's voice cut through the noise. Marcus turned his head just enough to see his little brother sprinting toward them, panic etched across his young face. Dawson snapped his head toward Malik, his grip tightening on Marcus. "Stay back, kid," he barked, "or you're next." Malik skidded to a stop, his chest heaving. His mother had just stepped out of the car, her hands covering her mouth in horror. Marcus fought to keep his breathing steady. "This isn't necessary," he said, his voice strained. "I'm cooperating." Dawson ignored him, his free hand moving toward the cuffs on his belt. "Yeah," Dawson muttered. "Then cooperate and get on the ground." Marcus's stomach twisted. The last time he was ordered to hit the ground, it was under enemy fire. Now it was in a gas station parking lot, and the enemy was wearing a badge. The pressure on Marcus's back increased as Dawson forced him harder against the truck. The rough metal was burning against his skin, but he refused to react. He'd endured worse. The gas station had been relatively quiet moments ago, but now the commotion was drawing attention. A few bystanders turned their heads, pausing mid-pump. Then the first cell phone appeared. A woman's voice cut through the tension. "He didn't do anything." Another man pulled out his phone, recording. "Bro, this is messed up." Dawson barely glanced at them. His grip on Marcus's wrist remained tight. "Sir," Marcus said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "Check my ID, my military badge, something." Dawson let out a chuckle. "Military, that's cute." He leaned in, his breath hot against Marcus's ear. "Maybe you stole that uniform too." Marcus's jaw tightened. He knew men like Dawson, small men who thrived on power, who needed to assert dominance over people they feared. He also knew that if he reacted the way Dawson wanted, this would escalate into something worse. Malik was still standing frozen a few feet away, fists clenched. Their mother was by his side, panic in her wide eyes. "Officer, please," she begged. "My son didn't do anything wrong." Dawson ignored her. Marcus exhaled slowly. "You want proof?" He shifted slightly so he could nod toward the passenger seat. "My wallet is in my duffel. Open it. Look inside." For the first time, Dawson hesitated. More people were watching, recording. Something in his demeanor shifted, as if he suddenly realized this wasn't the quiet, back-alley takedown he was used to. There were witnesses. Reluctantly, he released his grip just enough to reach through the open truck window. He yanked out the duffel bag, unzipping it roughly before digging inside. His fingers closed around a leather wallet, and he flipped it open. Inside, Marcus's military ID, his army badge, and his driver's license with his name clearly printed on it. Dawson's smirk vanished. The shift in his face was instant. One moment, he had been full of smug confidence. Now his jaw tensed, his grip tightening around the wallet. Marcus saw it. His mother saw it. And the cameras saw it too. The gas station had fallen silent, as if everyone was waiting for Dawson's next move. For a split second, there was a glimmer of something in the officer's eyes. Panic, maybe. He had messed up. Badly. But instead of admitting his mistake, he did something worse. He stuffed the wallet into his pocket. Marcus's heart pounded. Dawson stepped back, straightening his uniform. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Seems like you've got a lot of IDs in here," he muttered. "Almost like you've been collecting them." The blood drained from Marcus's face. He wasn't letting this go. He was doubling down. Dawson's fingers tightened around the radio at his shoulder, his voice sharp and unwavering. "Dispatch, we have a resisting suspect at the gas station," he said, eyes flicking toward the growing crowd. Marcus's breath hitched. Resisting? He hadn't moved an inch. His mother's voice trembled. "Resisting? He's standing still." Marcus forced himself to stay calm, though his pulse pounded in his ears. "I'm not resisting." Dawson smirked, like he had been waiting for that response. He shoved Marcus against the truck again, his face inches from his. "Tell that to the judge," Dawson sneered. The gas station erupted in outrage. "You're making this up," someone shouted. "This is illegal," another voice yelled. Phones were everywhere now. Dozens of people recording, some live streaming. But Dawson didn't care. He had power, and he was flexing it. Marcus clenched his fists. He wanted to fight back. His entire body screamed for him to push Dawson off, to make him stop. But he knew the second he did, the cop would win. Because that's what Dawson wanted. An excuse. The moment teetered on a dangerous edge. Then, a deep voice boomed across the parking lot. "That's enough." The sound was like a hammer hitting concrete. The entire gas station fell silent. Dawson's head snapped up, his smirk faltering. The crowd parted, and then they saw him. A massive figure stepped out of a sleek black SUV, the door closing with a quiet thud. Broad shoulders, towering height, a presence that dominated the space. Shaquille O'Neal. The air in the gas station seemed to shift. Dawson blinked. For the first time, hesitation flickered in his eyes. Marcus exhaled, barely believing what he was seeing. Shaq? Here? Shaq's expression was unreadable, but his eyes locked onto Dawson with the weight of a wrecking ball. "You got a problem with my guy here?" Shaq asked, his voice smooth but carrying a dangerous edge. Dawson squared his shoulders, trying to regain his composure. "Stay out of this. This is police business." Shaq took a slow step forward. "Oh yeah? Looks more like harassment to me." Dawson swallowed. The crowd wasn't on his side anymore. A few people whispered excitedly, others started cheering. Shaq tilted his head, his voice dropping lower. "Let me ask you something, officer." Dawson's grip tightened on Marcus's arm. He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Dawson's fingers twitched on his belt as Shaq took another step forward. The sheer size of the man was intimidating enough, but it was the way he moved. Calm, controlled, dangerous, that made the air around him feel heavier. The gas station was dead silent now. Marcus, still pressed against the truck, stared in disbelief. "Shaq?" Dawson squared his shoulders, trying to regain authority. He sneered. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Shaq's smirk was slow, deliberate. "Me? Just a guy who doesn't like bullies." A murmur ran through the crowd. Cameras were everywhere now, catching every second of the confrontation. Dawson scoffed. "This doesn't concern you. Step back." Shaq's eyes darkened. "Oh, but it does, because you're harassing a man who just got back from serving his country." Dawson didn't flinch, but a vein in his temple pulsed. He hated that the crowd was turning against him. He hated that this was being filmed. But most of all, he hated that someone like Shaq, someone he couldn't intimidate, was calling him out in front of everyone. Shaq folded his arms, towering over Dawson. "So, officer?" Shaq's voice was smooth, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. "Want to tell us all why you're arresting a U.S. soldier for pumping gas?" The crowd reacted instantly. "He's a soldier?" someone shouted. Wait, he just got back from duty?" Another gasped. Dawson's jaw clenched. He knew the situation was spiraling. Marcus took the opportunity. "Check my ID, check my military badge, check anything. I told you, this is my truck." Dawson ignored him. His focus was still locked on Shaq, his mind racing for a way to salvage control. "You think just 'cause you're famous, you can stick your nose where it doesn't belong?" Dawson snapped. Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. "No, I think I can step in when I see a racist cop making up excuses to justify a bad arrest." The crowd exploded. "Yeah, call him out." "He's right." Dawson's face burned. His authority was slipping through his fingers, and he knew it. "Enough of this," Dawson barked. "Turn around, hands behind your back." The energy in the gas station shifted. People booed. Someone yelled, "No way, man, that's Shaq." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so now I'm the problem?" He took a step closer, his towering frame completely eclipsing Dawson. "Or are you just mad you got caught?" Dawson hesitated, and that's when Shaq knew. He had him. Dawson's pulse pounded in his ears as he tightened his grip on his belt. He could feel the weight of the cameras on him, the murmurs from the crowd turning into something bigger, something he wasn't in control of anymore. Shaq, standing firm, barely seemed fazed. Instead, he slowly turned, his gaze scanning the gas station. The number of people recording had tripled in the past few minutes. Phones were held high. screens glowing as they captured every second. Some were whispering, others were outright commentating. "You all getting this on video?" Shaq asked, his voice carrying with a steady authority. A woman near the front nodded. "We've been recording since you stepped in." A young man held up his phone. "I'm live streaming to Instagram, TikTok. This is already blowing up, man." Shaq turned back to Dawson, arms crossed over his chest. "See, officer? You wanted an audience. Now you got one." Dawson's lip curled. "Turn those damn cameras off. This is police business." Shaq let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. "Oh, so now you don't want attention? Funny. You had no problem throwing a U.S. soldier against his own truck when you thought no one was looking." A ripple of outrage spread through the crowd. "He's a soldier?" someone exclaimed. "Yo, this is messed up." Marcus's mother stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger. "My son has served this country, and this is how he's welcomed home?" Dawson's jaw twitched. His grip on his belt was so tight his knuckles turned white. He couldn't reach for his weapon, not with so many witnesses. Instead, he went for intimidation. "I don't answer to celebrities," he sneered. Shaq smirked. "Cool. Maybe you'll answer to my 30 million followers." The crowd erupted. Dawson's entire body went stiff. "You're bluffing," he muttered. Shaq slowly lifted his phone and flipped the screen around. Live streaming. Hundreds of thousands of viewers. The gas station exploded with noise. "Oh, this dude is done. Damn, he's alive. Yo, this just made national news in real time." Dawson's breath caught. He fumbled for his radio, voice cracking slightly. "Dispatch, I need immediate backup." His phone buzzed. He flinched, yanked it out, looked down, and froze. His name was already trending. "Fire Rick Dawson. Shaq exposes racist cop." A flood of notifications clogged his screen. The comments were merciless. "This is why we don't trust cops." "No way. This is straight up harassment." "Bro is ruining his whole career. Ma!" His hands shook. His world was caving in, and he could feel it happening in real time. Shaq tilted his head. "Still feeling big, officer?" Dawson swallowed, glancing around, searching for a way out. Then, his radio crackled. A stern voice came through. "Officer Dawson, return to your vehicle." Now Dawson's face drained of color. And Shaq? He wasn't done yet. The gas station had gone completely silent. Every camera was pointed at Officer Dawson, capturing every second of his reckless abuse of power. But instead of backing down, Dawson's frustration boiled over. His face turned red, his jaw clenched, and in a sudden outburst, he made the biggest mistake of his career. "That's it," Dawson snapped, yanking his handcuffs from his belt. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." Shaq's massive frame didn't move an inch. He stared at Dawson, his expression unreadable, as if debating whether this was even worth his energy. Then, to everyone's surprise, he chuckled. "You gonna arrest me?" Shaq asked, amusement laced in his voice. "For what?" Dawson's grip on the cuffs tightened. He was already too far in to back down now. "Interfering with an arrest," he spat. "Obstruction of justice." Shaq tilted his head. "Obstruction?" His deep voice rang out, reaching every bystander. "You mean calling out a dirty cop in broad daylight? That's obstruction?" The crowd murmured. People whispered to each other, some shaking their heads, others stepping closer, eager to see how this unfolded. Marcus, still standing near his truck, his wrists sore from Dawson's earlier grip, couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Don't touch him!" he shouted, his voice thick with rage. "You've done enough!" Dawson's hand twitched. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. His eyes darted around, noticing how every single person had a phone raised, recording his every move. For a split second, doubt flashed across his face. But then, just as quickly, his arrogance returned. "I don't care who you are," Dawson growled, taking a step toward Shaq. "You break the law, you get arrested." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "You sure about that?" Then, ring. Dawson flinched at the sudden sound. It wasn't coming from his radio. Shaq, still perfectly calm, pulled his phone from his pocket and glanced at the screen. A slow, knowing grin spread across his face. "Hold that thought," Shaq said, holding up a single finger as he answered the call. The gas station was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Everyone watched, waiting, holding their breath. Yeah? Shaq said into the phone. A pause. Then his grin widened. Oh, you're watching this live? That's crazy. Dawson blinked. Who, who are you talking to? Shaq met his eyes, his voice laced with amusement. The mayor. The crowd erupted. Gasps, cheers, murmurs of disbelief spread like wildfire. Dawson took a shaky step back. His confidence wavered. For the first time, real fear flickered across his face. Shaq lowered the phone, locking eyes with Dawson. He wants to talk to you. The tension in the air was suffocating. Officer Dawson stood frozen, his grip tightening around the cuffs still dangling from his fingers. His authority, the power he had wielded so recklessly just moments ago, was slipping away, and he knew it. The gas station crowd had grown larger, their eyes locked on him, their phones recording his every move. Then Shaq, standing tall and composed, held his phone to his ear, his deep voice cutting through the silence. Yeah, you seeing this? A beat passed, then another. Dawson's face lost all color. Whoever was on the other end of that call, it mattered. Shaq's lips curled into a small smirk. Yeah, he's standing right in front of me. Dawson swallowed hard. His bravado from earlier was crumbling. Who, who are you talking to? His voice cracked slightly. Shaq didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch just long enough to make Dawson sweat. Then finally he spoke. The mayor. The collective gasp from the crowd was deafening. Some people murmured in disbelief. Others cheered. Dawson stumbled over his words. That's not possible. Shaq raised an eyebrow. You think I'm playing? He turned the phone slightly, switching it to speaker mode. The crisp voice of Mayor Sullivan came through loud and clear. This is Mayor Sullivan, the voice boomed. And Officer Dawson, I'm watching this live. What the hell do you think you're doing? Dawson flinched as if he'd been slapped. His radio crackled. Static buzzed before a commanding voice cut through. Officer Dawson, return to your vehicle. Now the crowd erupted. Cheering, laughter, and jeers rang out as people immediately began reposting the moment on social media. Dawson's hands shook. But sir, I said now. Dawson's jaw clenched. His entire body was stiff, his fingers twitching at his sides. His eyes darted around, first at Shaq, then at Marcus, then at the crowd. He was looking for a way out, some excuse, some justification for his actions. Shaq, still calm, took a step closer, towering over Dawson. His voice dropped to a near whisper, low, firm, undeniably final. You gonna ignore that order? Dawson swallowed, hard. For the first time since this all started, he had no words. He was out of options. Slowly, almost robotically, he clipped his cuffs back onto his belt. Then without another word, he turned, storming toward his squad car. The cameras followed his every step, capturing every moment of his humiliation. Malik, Marcus's younger brother, let out a whoop of victory. That's right. Walk away. Shaq chuckled but didn't take his eyes off Dawson until the cop reached his car. Dawson sat in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel. His face burned with rage. Then, he slammed his fist against the dashboard. This wasn't over. Not for him. Dawson sat in his squad car, his grip tight on the steering wheel. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. His radio buzzed again. But this time, the voice on the other end wasn't just issuing an order. It was sealing his fate. Officer Dawson, this is your final warning. Return to headquarters immediately. He could barely hear the words over the cheering crowd outside. The very people who had once looked away, too scared to speak, were now celebrating his downfall. Phones were still pointed at him, capturing every humiliating second. Standing tall, Shaq crossed his arms, his gaze locked on Dawson through the windshield. His presence alone was a force of gravity, an unshakable reminder of just how badly Dawson had messed up. Dawson's hands shook as he reached for the gear shift. His pride screamed at him to stay, to fight back, to reclaim the authority slipping through his fingers. But he knew. If he ignored another order, if he tried to push this further, his career wouldn't just be in jeopardy, it would be completely destroyed. He exhaled sharply. His fingers twitched. Then, slowly, stiffly, he put the car into drive. As the squad car started rolling forward, the crowd erupted into cheers. People clapped, some jeered. A few shouted words that cut through him like a knife. About time. Yeah, walk away. You just got humbled, buddy. Marcus stood beside Shaq, his mother gripping his arm, tears still shining in her eyes. His younger brother Malik raised a triumphant fist in the air. Dawson's stomach twisted. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was the one in charge. He was the one with power. But now his badge meant nothing. As he turned onto the main road, his phone buzzed violently against the dashboard. Texts, notifications, headlines. He didn't need to look. He already knew what they said. Racist cop tries to arrest Army veteran. Shaq stops him. Shaquille O'Neal humiliates officer in viral confrontation. Justice served. Officer suspended after attempting false arrest. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. His face burned. His career was slipping away. And yet, something told him this wasn't over. Back at the gas station, Shaq wasn't done. He turned to Marcus, placing a massive hand on his shoulder. You good, soldier? Marcus exhaled slowly, as if he was releasing years of frustration. I don't even know what just happened. Shaq smirked. You just won. That's what happened. The crowd was still buzzing, people talking, replaying the moment on their phones. But Shaq wasn't celebrating yet. His eyes darkened. His mind was already working. This wasn't just about Marcus. This was bigger. One dirty cop wasn't the problem. The system that let him act like this was. Shaq pulled out his phone and made another call. This time, it wasn't just the mayor on the other end. This fight was far from over. The dust hadn't even settled before Shaq made his next move. Standing tall in the middle of the gas station, surrounded by stunned onlookers, he pulled out his phone. He wasn't just going to walk away. This wasn't over. Hours later, the world was watching. A packed press conference, cameras flashing, reporters scrambling to get their microphones in place. The tension in the air was electric. Shaq stood at the podium, Marcus at his side, along with several veterans, civil rights leaders, and city officials. This was bigger than one cop. Shaq leaned forward, his deep voice booming through the speakers. What happened to Marcus Carter is unacceptable. The room fell silent, every eye locked on him. This man put his life on the line for his country. He came home expecting respect. Instead, he got slammed against his own truck by a cop who saw his skin before his uniform. Gasps rippled through the audience. Shaq's jaw tightened. He wasn't here to entertain. He was here to change things. This isn't just about Marcus, Shaq continued. It's about every soldier who comes home and gets treated like a suspect instead of a hero. Every black man who gets pulled over for looking suspicious. Every officer who abuses their badge because they think no one's watching. A murmur spread through the reporters. The truth was uncomfortable, but Shaq wasn't done. That's why I'm making this public, he said, glancing toward the cameras. We need accountability, we need change, and we need it now. The fallout was immediate. Headlines spread across every major news outlet. Social media exploded. People were demanding action, and the pressure was too much for the city to ignore. By midnight, the police department released an official statement. Officer Rick Dawson was being placed on immediate suspension, pending investigation. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. Marcus sat in front of the TV at home, watching the press conference replay on the news. His hands were still shaking, not with fear, but with disbelief. This was actually happening. He looked at Shaq sitting across from him. You didn't have to do all this for me. Shaq gave him a knowing smile. Nah, man, I had to do this for all of us. But as Marcus took a deep breath, a knock echoed from the front door. He stood up confused. When he opened it, his jaw dropped, because standing there holding a set of keys was the last person he ever expected. And they had one final surprise waiting for him. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the massive crowd gathered in the town square. Banners waved, flags rippled in the breeze, and a massive stage stood at the center of it all. But all eyes were on one man. Marcus Carter stood frozen, trying to process the scene in front of him, a military appreciation event. For him, the mayor, city officials, veterans, and hundreds of community members filled the square. Cheering, clapping, holding signs with his name. Shaq stood beside him, grinning. Told you I had a surprise. Marcus swallowed hard, overwhelmed. Days ago, he was being treated like a criminal. Now, he was being honored as a hero. The mayor stepped up to the mic, clearing his throat. Today, we recognize Sergeant Marcus Carter, who served our country with honor, only to come home and face an injustice no soldier should ever endure. That ends today. Applause erupted. The mayor turned to Marcus. On behalf of this city, we offer our sincerest apologies and our deepest gratitude. A folded American flag was presented to Marcus. He accepted it, his hands shaking. His mother wiped away tears. Malik, his younger brother, nudged him. Man, you better smile. This is your moment. Marcus exhaled, a small chuckle escaping. It finally felt real. Shaq clapped a hand on his shoulder. You think we're done? Marcus frowned. Wait, what? Shaq smirked. Time for part 2. The crowd parted, revealing a brand new black Ford F-150 truck parked in front of the stage, gleaming under the sunlight. A giant red bow set on the hood. Marcus blinked. Number no way. Shaq tossed him a set of keys. Way. The crowd roared. Marcus caught the keys, staring down at them. His mind raced. His old truck, the one Dawson accused him of stealing, was being held as evidence. But now he had something better. His mother hugged him tightly. You deserve this, baby. Malik grinned. Bet I get to drive it first. Marcus laughed for the first time in days. He turned to Shaq, shaking his head. Man, how do I even begin to thank you? Shaq shrugged. Just pay it forward. But miles away, sitting alone in a dark apartment, Rick Dawson stared at the TV screen. The press conference, the celebration, Marcus smiling, Shaq shaking hands. Dawson's fist clenched. His career was gone. His badge was gone. And as the screen flickered, his rage burned hotter than ever. This wasn't over. Rick Dawson sat in the dim light of his apartment, the only sound in the room the slow ticking of a clock on the wall. His hands gripped a half-empty whiskey bottle, the weight of the last 24 hours pressing down on him like a boulder. His phone screen lit up, another news alert. He already knew what it would say, but still he looked. Former officer Dawson arrested after viral video exposes misconduct. Shaquille O'Neal's intervention leads to major police shakeup. Justice for Marcus Carter, a town finally holds corrupt officer accountable. Dawson clenched his jaw, staring blankly at the screen. His name was now a headline, not for bravery, not for service, but for disgrace. It had all unraveled so fast. The gas station, the soldier, Shaq, and now the flashing lights outside his window were for him. A firm knock rattled his door. This is the police. Rick Dawson, open up. For a brief second, his fingers twitched toward his badge, except it wasn't there anymore. They had taken everything. Outside the courthouse, a different scene was unfolding. Shaq stood tall, surrounded by a crowd of reporters, cameras flashing like lightning. Beside him, Marcus Carter adjusted the collar of his jacket. No longer in military fatigues, just a man home at last. A journalist pushed forward, microphone in hand. Shaq, what do you say to those who call you a hero for stepping in? Shaq let out a small chuckle, shaking his head. I'm no hero. The real hero is standing right here. He placed a firm hand on Marcus's shoulder. A man who fought for his country only to come home and face this? That's unacceptable. The crowd murmured in agreement. Marcus exhaled slowly, his shoulders finally losing the tension they had carried since that night. The fight was over, and he had won. Meanwhile, inside the courthouse, Dawson sat in a holding cell. The heavy steel bars in front of him felt like an insult. He had once locked up criminals. Now he was the one waiting behind bars. He heard footsteps, a guard passing by. The man glanced at him, shook his head, and smirked. Karma's a funny thing, ain't it? Dawson didn't respond. He had nothing left to say. By nightfall, Shaq's video had surpassed 100 million views. A moment that began with injustice ended with accountability. And Marcus? He finally got the homecoming he deserved.